Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. One of the stories that's been floating around Ottawa amidst this pandemic has been the appointment of a new Auditor General. This is an independent officer of Parliament who gets to look over the spending and certain programs and so on with both government departments and crown corporations and provides reports to Parliament on a semi-regular basis. Why this is important is all independent officers of Parliament are important, but also there's been some hay being made around this appointment, and I thought we would explore that a little bit. So the new Auditor General is going to be Karen Hogan, and she was a Deputy Auditor General within the department already, so it's coming up from within. And what we've been hearing about mostly over the course of the meetings that have happened around confirming this appointment, not really confirming, but essentially having both House Committee and the Senate kind of give their nod, because we don't do confirmations in Canada like they do in the US. But suffice to say, through this process, one of the recurring themes has been the Auditor General's budget. Why this is become important is because there have been complaints from the interim Auditor General that he no longer had enough budget to carry on his existing work and do all of the additional work that Parliament had been asking of him to do. So he was going to have to let those existing audits lapse for the meantime. And a lot of MPs got very up in arms about this and tried to make this about the government, trying to avoid accountability and so on. And I thought this, deserved a little bit of unpacking just for the sake of it here. So one of the things that we need to remember is that the Auditor General generally does a number of program audits over the course of a year. They usually have a spring and a fall report. And part of that is they will also audit I think it's about 12 crown corporations over the course of a year. So to ensure that they're, in compliance and so on, and their risk management strategies and so on and so on. So those are the kinds of things that happen on a regular basis. These are the kinds of audits that the Auditor General normally does. Some of these program audits can be things like, does this tax program provide value for money? Does this spending program get good results? Is there a particular amount of waste going out in this department or as part of this program? So these are fairly they go through different cycles. I think they probably have an internal calendar about which departments they look at over the course of a year, or if there's a particular program that has been flagged to their attention, they will do that as well. What has been a bit more unusual recently is that Parliament, or rather the House of Commons, has been asking the Auditor General to do a lot more work than normally would be. So one of the first examples of the current Parliament is that there was a supply day motion from the Conservatives for the Auditor General to look over the government's infrastructure program, claiming that money wasn't going out as promised and so on. Now, for those of us who paid attention to the news, a lot of that was because provinces were not stepping up and doing their portions of infrastructure approvals. So it was delaying federal money going out the door, but a certain amount of political hay was being made over this. And as a supply day motion, the other opposition parties joined in because it was basically a chance to embarrass the government. That's what you can do at an opposition day, which is the other name for supply days. So one of the first supply day motions of this Parliament was basically get the Auditor General to look at those books. Well, because that was not on the Auditor General's plan, those resources had to be diverted in order to make that happen. And then when the pandemic hit, what happened was MPs decided that rather than do their due diligence on all of this spending before money was approved to go out the door, they simply made the condition for this that the Auditor General would go through this spending after it had gone out the door. So essentially they piled on a whole bunch of work on the Auditor General and then didn't bother to attach any additional resources to go with that. Now, the office had already been dealing with some financial constraints, partially because under the Conservatives, the previous Auditor General had voluntarily cut his own budget to prove that he was, kind of going along with the government's deficit reduction plans. But they'd also been neglecting a lot of IT reforms that had been, long overdue. They're still using DOS-based systems, apparently. So the current interim Auditor General needed to finally, get something done on that. So while the current government did restore funding to that office and increase it, there were still resource challenges around getting the IT modernization done at the same time as ensuring that all of these programs were getting audited. And then the House of Commons asked the Auditor General to do all this additional work, and now obviously the resources aren't there for all of that either. So it's an ongoing conversation, and part of that has been people saying, well, why can't we ensure an apolitical funding mechanism for the Auditor General going forward? And that kind of raises some red flags for me. One of the kind of criticisms I have of our reliance on independent officers of Parliament, because there's been a huge growth of them over the last couple of decades, is that these officers have no real accountability. There was an incident several years ago where the first Public Service Integrity Commissioner turned out to be a very bad appointment and had been basically terrorizing the office and not performing her duties, and was removed on that basis. But it's one of these things where it's very rare, and because they have no accountability, these officers basically get a free rein, and a lot of that has to do with kind of showboating in the media, which has been known for some officers. This is kind of important because we are basically turning over a lot of power and authority to these officers, as well as a lot of basically media credibility. Journalists like to take whatever they say at face value and kind of run with it, usually because it's scathing on a government, and that always makes a good headline. But sometimes things don't always work as planned. Certainly, the Senate audit conducted by the previous Auditor General is certainly an example where the Auditor General both kind of went overboard, and the audit itself was a bit of a mess in that there were a lot of decisions that were made arbitrarily. A lot of things were counted as, wrongful expenses for no reason at all. And there's a litany of things, and to the point where the Senate committee asked for a legal opinion of that audit at one point, and a lot of the things didn't meet legal thresholds. And nevertheless, this audit was used to kind of brand the Senate as this bastion of problems, most of which had been corrected long before this audit even started. So it's, but not enough people went and actually questioned it, and they were a little too deferential to that Auditor General. And these are the kinds of things that I think we need to be careful of. Parliament keeps turning over more authority to officers of Parliament. And the last one, we created the Parliamentary Budget Officer as an officer of Parliament. Previously, they'd been attached to the Library of Parliament, but now as an independent officer, they have even more scope and authority and less oversight. And I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing in our system, because there's no way that we can hold these people to account. And accountability is a very important concept in a democracy like ours. And that is everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks.